All right, welcome back to the Canyon Chasers podcast, the Breaking Zone. I think we have an exciting episode for you guys today. This is going to be the innovation episode.
Well, at least one of them.
At least one of them. I think we're going to talk about this a lot because even in our prep before this, we chatted for probably the length of a podcast about what we're going to talk about in this podcast because innovation, we like to think in our sport that we're innovative, right? Motorcycles are always innovating. But the reality of it is we're very entrenched in tradition. And a lot of these really great ideas, if they don't get traction right away, they're abandoned. Mm-hmm. And motorcycles are really not as advanced as I think they could be. And I thought we would talk about motorcycle innovation today.
Well, and we could probably talk for a minute about there's probably several reasons that slows down innovation in our sport, right? There's the very first one, which is sort of kind of, I don't know if it's skepticism or if it's just, that's not the way I like it. I don't want it done that way. I want to go back to the old way. And we're watching this play out in real time in MotoGP, for example.
Sure, right.
I mean, I think Ducati was really the first to start playing with aerodynamics, but like back in 2016 and earlier even maybe.
Isn't that when they were also playing with a carbon fiber chassis, which was...
Yeah, like they exactly. And they started trying these little, I remember the very first Ducati that had, I think Casey Stoner was on it. That's how long ago this was. It had these little, just tiny little baby scoop
They
wings.
called them winglets. Winglets. And like we were all making fun. We were putting cardboard winglets on our track bikes. Yeah.
And it was kind of, again, it's that attitude, which is human nature. We kind of mock it at first because we don't get it or we think it's silly or it's unnecessary. We just don't like it. And now look at aerodynamics. Now look at an Aprilia and tell me it looks like anything else in the world. It doesn't look anything like a motorcycle did, but it's because it's so effective that they're all in on it now.
Do you think part of the skepticism or reluctance for innovation is also the fact that motorcycles are so risky? So there's always like a safety element. Going back to the winglets, right? There was this concern, well, if there a crash, is that winglet, that little carbon fiber blade, going to end up in someone's rib cage, right? And then we talk about some of the other innovations over the years that have come and gone, right? Like the early anti-dive front end suspensions. Like, do you think safety slows down some of these ideas?
For sure, there's tons of reasons. I sometimes wonder if, specifically in motorsports, if some of those reasons are kind of blown up or weaponized to stop something, right? I can remember when Ducati first started doing the wings and then everybody was doing them, they were truly just wings, like blades that just shot out and had maybe a little end plate, but not even that really. And then those quickly, they have to be a closed profile, right? They have to loop back on top of themselves. So you don't have these, blades basically on the sides of the bikes. Totally fine. But I do think sometimes not that there is no safety risk at all, but I think sometimes the safety can be exaggerated because someone doesn't want it or someone wants the more traditional look and feel. And I get it. Like if you go back and look at, we've talked about this before, but the MotoGP bikes, especially like the Yamaha and stuff from 08, 09 era, was a way better looking motorcycle.
Yeah, I totally agree.
But this is the nature of things. They kind of progress over time. But yeah, a lot of times there's just an initial pushback because it's different. It's not what I'm used to. I almost don't like the fact that you're innovating sometimes, right? There's just a natural human instinct to push back against what's new or different.
I think human nature is to be resistant to change, right? And we look at a motorcycle, and this is what a motorcycle looks like. When you were a kid, you drew a motorcycle. Or maybe a better example, when you were a kid, you drew a sports car. And every kid who drew a sports car was a Lotus Esprit. They all looked exactly the same, like that wedge shape. And so we get this idea that this is what the thing is. And innovation sometimes threatens that because now it looks wildly different. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even beyond that, right? Like I'm old enough to remember when radial tires were the new thing on motorcycles. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't that long ago. And it was the same kind of fear because radial tires did not last nearly as long as, radial tires didn't last nearly as long as the old bias ply tires. But I remember in college when your only choice were bias ply tires, it was called feathering the tire. You would go, it wasn't even fast by today's standard, but you were going fast enough in the canyon that the tire would slip and it would create like the edges of a feather coming off the edge of the tire. And that's if you were a super fast, cool guy, you were feathering your bias ply tires. Then radials came out. And of course, you're not going to feather a radial tire. They turn into these balls of stickiness, which is infinitely better. But people were so reluctant and so afraid of radial tires because they had different profiles, they had different shapes, they didn't look like a tire even.
Mm-hmm. Not what you were used to anyway,
right? And so it changed the geometry of the bikes. It was all sorts of, it was a weird time for motorcycles. We hadn't even decided on front wheel sizes. Like, I think my first 3 motorcycles, my first 3 sport bikes had different size front wheels, yeah.
Well, and now, but it's, eventually it evolves, and now that's the norm. You can't not buy radial tires. Basically.
Right, and every sport bike especially has 17-inch front wheels.
Yeah,
and I think
standard.
it's easier.
Yeah,
it's way better because you always like, does that bike have an 18-inch front wheel? Is it an 18-110 or is it an 18-130? Like really weird sizes. And then the 900RR had a 16.
Yep.
Yeah, and so but it was an innovative time. Right, that's when a lot of crazy ideas were coming out. Like the big thing back then were suspension was probably a bigger deal than the tires. We all know, we're all familiar with a fork, and we're all pretty familiar with cartridge forks, but back then they were all just damper rods. And a damper rod fork was really all it was this big rod bathed in oil, and they drilled holes in the rod. And the oil would have to pass through the rod as the fork compressed and rebounded. And the tuners of the day would drill more holes, or they would fill holes in with lead to control or limit how the compression and rebound worked. And so the big problem of that day was dive. You'd go to the front brake and the forks would just fold in on themselves because you couldn't have, you're running like 90 weight oil in some of these forks to try to control it. And so all the companies were coming up with crazy anti-dive technology. They all had them. Honda had one where when you squeeze the brake caliper would rotate and push a valve inside the fork and close the valve and lock the compression.
To stop the dive?
Yeah, it basically locked out the compression damping, so it held the fork up. Yamaha had their system. Honda had their system. That's when BMW basically came out with the telelever systems to combat the dive problem. And then came the cartridge fork, and we all that innovation just stopped. And we all went to cartridge forks.
Yeah, most of those ideas just get parked. And the only time you ever see a damper rod anymore, if you even see one, is on a really cheap, low end, maybe a scooter or what have you. Just something that is truly built to a price.
Right. Even a lot of your cheaper entry level bikes are still a cartridge fork without adjustment, but they're still a cartridge fork. So like a good suspension tuner can open up a lot of those budget cartridge forks, do some mild tuning to them, and make them really, really good. Where damper rods, there was very little that could be done with them.
And there's still a few cases where you do have some unique design still going on. So you mentioned the BMW, their telelever, which is like a Hossack.
Well, it's kind of a hybrid Hossack, right? And we've talked about Hossack before. The dude's still alive. You can go find his YouTube channel. Maybe I'll put a link to his YouTube channel. You should go watch some of his videos. Genius. But when BMW basically pirated the Hossack idea for the telelever, the thinking of that era was that the reduction of trail under braking was bad. So we're going to make trail increase when we go to braking. We've learned a lot in the last 25 years since then. And even the GS 1300 is running the new, I can't remember what they're calling it, Telelever Pro or Telelever Plus or something like that, where they've changed the shape of the A arm, they've changed the arc of it so that the trail is much more linear. It doesn't kick out like the old systems did. So I'm a little sad that it's taken BMW so many years to innovate or tweak or adjust that design, but I'm happy to see them doing it, right? And then on the flip side is you have Honda, which is running a true Hossack front end. And I think some of the BMWs are now, like your big tour bikes, are running a true Hossack front end, which is this really crazy linkage system, which is super genius, super clever.
And is it on like the Goldwing?
The Goldwing is what Honda's running it on. And I think it's their GT, the BMW K series, which is 4-cylinder GT bike.
The full fairing
touring bike. It has it. And they're really great in that application because dive is a problem when you're on a 600 or 700 pound motorcycle and then you put your wife and your luggage on it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dive's a big issue. And that's where like the telelever and the Hossack front end systems are still really, really good because they're really good at mitigating and managing that load transfer.
And there's some other designs out there still too. I know by Moda, I think I've seen one in real life twice maybe with the Tessie.
Yeah, I've ridden one. Very odd. It's very weird.
Which, if you're not familiar, they have a hub center steering front end that basically it looks like a swing arm.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a single-sided swing arm off the front of the bike that holds the front wheel, and then it has hub center steering in order to actually manipulate and turn.
Like really could link, like crazy linkage with turnbuckles and it's kind of similar to the old Yamaha GTS 1000. It had a similar kind of hub steering. It had a single-sided front end. Again, this is back in the era when we were all trying to solve the dive issue with front end forks. And it's, again, we think we're innovative. And why did we stop designing all of these different non-traditional front ends? Because I've asked this question a lot of times. Like, I'm the trail braking guy, and I believe firmly in trail braking. But do we trail brake because that's the best way to implement a fork on a motorcycle to get the bike to change direction? Or if one of these other systems had caught on, would we be riding in a very different way? Maybe better, maybe worse. I don't really know, because we stopped exploring some of these other ideas.
And I've thought about that question that you've posed before is, do we ride this way because that's what the machine, sets us up to do basically, or is that the ideal way? And I guess it's almost impossible to know, because it does feel like everything was designed and engineered along this path for so long now that trying to picture a different world or different ending to the movie it's really hard to imagine, because you look at, the profile of a tire, the way it's shaped, it's really meant to compress and squish into the grounds as you turn and get more, more grip into the ground. There's just so many things about the vehicle at this point that are designed around this idea that you load the front end as you go to the brakes to steer, that it's almost impossible to imagine an alternative version where all of the other components, not just your fork or your front end rather, is actually built to deal with this or work with this. How different would tires be if it wasn't a standard telescopic fork that was the norm? If it was some other system, would we have totally invented a different type of tire at that point?
When I had that conversation with Pierre Terreblanche, one of the things that he mentioned that I hadn't really thought about much until you just said that is that he kept saying that riders like the feel of a fork. And maybe some of like these manufacturers have explored these ideas, but when they tested them maybe with their test riders or whomever, if you've ridden a telelever front end, it doesn't give you the same amount of feel as a traditional fork. When I rode the BMW Tessie, it had less feel than a telelever. Mm-hmm. You really had no idea what was going on up there. You kind of had to trust what was going on. And it's a curious question you pose. Is it we, the riders, didn't necessarily demand it from an aesthetic standpoint or it looks normal standpoint, but maybe a feel standpoint. Mm-hmm. It feels different. When Rossi went to the Ducati, he told them to abandon the carbon fiber chassis. And if I remember correctly, it was because he couldn't feel what was going on. He couldn't understand what the motorcycle was telling him.
Well, and I think that Rossi era at Ducati, there was probably a lot of things that were going wrong with that. And I think the carbon frame was probably the easy scapegoat, because it was, hey, the front end's vague and I can't tell what's going on. You run a carbon frame and nobody else does. That must be the problem. Because even then, when they switched to an aluminum frame,
it's not like anything fixed. Yeah, it was the same problem. Yeah.
On the front end part, though, I was thinking about this. It's not like, we invented the cartridge front end, cartridge telescopic fork, and suddenly there are no more problems or issues with the front end.
Right. We still have, like, forks have issues. There's the stiction. You have the flexing and the binding under braking. You have all these bushings in there, and as they wear, and there's slop, and it's not especially super elegant. And did it stick because it was, from a manufacturing standpoint, it was relatively cheap to change your tooling from a damper rod to a cartridge.
Right. And so some of those things, Dave mentioned stiction. Stiction, if you go to your bike in your garage right now, if you push the fork down, hold the front brake, push the fork down and let it come up slowly and measure the travel, and then hold the front brake and lift your front end and let it down slowly and measure the travel, it will be different by, I would argue, probably at least a ½ inch between the two, maybe more, depending on how bad your seals and bushings are. You would measure those types of stiction numbers on a brand new, fully serviced fork. That's just the nature of a telescopic fork, is they have this issue inside of them. The other issue that they deal with a lot is as you brake and start to slow down, all of these tubes, all this metal is flexing slightly. So it may feel like that telescopic fork moves nice and smooth in the garage up and down, but when it's actually under load on the road, all those things are buckling and binding up against each other, and you're forcing things past the bushings. And this is why the bushings wear out, frankly. The other issue that you run into is what's called cavitation, which is when you take the fluid inside of the cartridge fork and you force the fluid through a lot of movement, you basically introduce a bunch of air into the fluid. And so it's no longer this nice, perfectly viscous, consistent fluid. It's this aerated, bubbly fluid, which does not behave at all how you want it to, especially as it's overheating over time. So it's not like a cartridge fork is like suddenly perfect. It's just most of the time the best answer we have.
Right. And it's the cheap answer. I mean, you underpin something I'm just going to throw out there really quick. Change your fork fluid at least every 2 years. Yeah. If you're a street rider, if you're on the track, at least once a year. That oil goes through hell and high water.
Oh yeah.
The temperatures, the cavitation, the air, the emulsification.
Well, and especially on a road bike, just the grime.
Right.
Right.
Like because it gets introduced up through the bugs.
But yeah, all that gunk gets in there. Yeah. So it's interesting because there's, again, it is the standard fork for performance, but it's not the only option. It reminds me of, we talked just briefly about this on a previous one, but Motoczysz, do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of our local pro racer, Shane Turpin, he was, I believe, a test rider for Motoczysz.
Yeah, he got to do a test ride. I want to say it was probably back in 2007.
And that's when you and I both got to, we walked around them. I never rode one. I don't know if you ever rode them, but I touched it. I sat on it. I twisted the throttle and heard the engine make cool sounds.
Yeah, they came out and tested it. At the time was Miller Motorsports Park, way back when it was a pretty new facility to test their bike. If you're not familiar with the Motoczysz, we could probably dive down a little rabbit hole on this.
I'd love to talk about the Motoczysz because if we're on the innovation episode, we should definitely talk about how innovative, if we're in the UK, thank you all our UK viewers, how innovative Motoczysz was, because he was really willing to take some big swings. I argue part of why the bike struggled is he took too many big swings all at once. But let's talk about, since we're talking about front ends, I think you're pretty familiar with the front end of that bike more than I am.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the whole project itself. So back, short preview of the story here, Michael Czysz was an architect. He was not an engineer. And he was like a high-end house architect for buildings, casinos, houses, things like that. Anyway, he was always passionate about bikes and just decided in his 40s, to hell with it, I'm going to go build a bike. I want to make a bike. And then put together, a team, but it was a small team. It was really just mostly self-funded, I think. So not a big group, but when you have that narrow of a goal and a totally dedicated team, nothing's off the table, which is kind of the fun thing. And you don't see this in big manufacturers as much. They're too conservative, they're too careful and so forth. You get a small group that just can move quick, and you get these types of projects that come out of them. So that bike, if you go look this thing up, had a ton of really cool stuff on it. So the first thing that you'll notice, I'll come back to the front end in a second. The first thing about the bike that is weird is it is a V4, kind of.
It was a split crank V4 or something like that, right? Because half of the crank turned clockwise and the other half turned anti-clockwise, or
so if you just glanced at it, you would have assumed it was an inline 4. But it was mounted longitudinally, so not transverse, so not across the engine or across the bike, but in line with the wheels, the crank was. What was interesting about it was the front 2 cylinders were attached to a crank and the back 2 cylinders were attached to a different crank.
Right, yeah.
And then so the cranks were geared together. I can't remember which one was up and down, but one of them was lower than the other. So basically, if you took the 2 crank axes and dropped one below and then they were geared together, because of that direct gear, they counter-rotated. So they both rotated in opposite directions, so they canceled out gyroscopic forces. So one of the issues with a standard longitudinal frame or longitudinally mounted engine is if you were to rev it, if it was on the side stand, you revved it, you would watch the bike
Right.
tilt.
Yeah, anybody who's revved a Goldwing, an old ST1100 or ST1300, a Moto Guzzi, an old CX500, all these engines that were mounted effectively sideways, if we're talking in traditional sense,
longitudinal axis,
that you would rev it and the bike would kick to the side. And like the BMW put a counterbalancer in and took it out, and their customers complained, and so they introduced some more of that like sideways kick fling into it, because again, going back to tradition, I like that it does the thing when I spin. I like that. And so they put it back by customer demand.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So what they did was they took this, so it's almost as if there was two parallel twins that just happened to be geared together in this engine. But in order to make the thing more compact, I believe the engines were adjusted.
It was a narrow V, wasn't it?
It was like 15 degrees.
Yeah, I was going to say like 13 was the number that was in my head, but 15?
It was 15 degrees, and that was as wide as they could go and still share a common head surface.
Oh, no kidding. So it shared the same head?
Yeah, so
I didn't know that.
It was basically a single head that could bolt onto it. But the weird thing was, because of that angle, it had three camshafts.
So one down the middle.
So the long center one was intake.
Did two intakes and two exhausts.
The center one was all
intakes. Okay.
And then the two outsides
had their own.
So
the
exhaust.
Three camshafts.
Three camshafts.
Fascinating. I didn't know that part. That's really clever.
So really interesting engine. And then the other part that was unique is the transmission sat directly below the crank.
Oh, interesting.
So basically what they developed was a really tall engine, but it was really super, super narrow, and then kind of nothing behind it. And then the clutch sat at the front of the engine, almost touching, like not touching, but almost toward the front wheel.
Oh, so where your traditional oil cooler might be.
Yeah, which helped keep the clutch cooler and other benefits,
right.
But the way that the transmission was mounted in there is it was like a 20-minute job to basically drop the transmission out and put a whole new one in. It was effectively like a cartridge transmission is now. Similar idea. It was a very quick change. But all these things, famously, the engine itself was narrower than the rear tire.
That's incomprehensible.
Yeah, it was
because
really,
back
really
then,
narrow.
like a 190 was a big tire.
Yeah.
Right? Like we were all still running 180s when 180s were relatively big. When that came out.
Really interesting thing. The two exhausts obviously came out of either side on this thing because of the way they had the exhaust ports routed to the back of the engine. It sat inside of a carbon fiber chassis, which was effectively made to be hollow and sealed. The chassis was the airbox.
Oh, that's better than making the chassis a gas tank, I think.
Yeah, so the chassis was effectively the airbox.
That's kind of
smart.
Because like even looking at the bike behind you, you can see where they drilled two big giant holes through the frame to get the air into the airbox. Why not like skip one of those steps? Yeah,
so it had this massive airbox volume that was pressurized through ram air, of course, that fed into this thing. And also the radiators had two small, thin, like almost like motocross style radiators on either side in the front, very narrow though, and then another one in the back under the tail. Similar to how Britain did it, actually.
Oh, right.
Where the radiator was underneath the...
Which I always thought that was such a great idea, because one of the very first things I buy for every motorcycle I buy is a radiator guard. So I've always, like, Honda was playing with this also in the late 90s, early 2000s with the Super Hawk and the RC51, where they put the radiators on the side, as opposed to putting it in the front. And like, you just eliminate so much damage from road debris.
Yep.
So sticking it in the tail section, and you think the way your helmet cools, it's not that all the air goes into your helmet is what cools your head. It's the exhaust vents out the back of your head, right? As the wind passes over, it pulls the stale air out of your helmet from the rear. Mm-hmm. Why not? Why are we not doing more of that with motorcycles, I wonder?
So they did that with the radiator system. The other thing that was unique, the rear end was odd too. It had actually two shock springs.
I remember this. Yeah.
It was almost, and you could tell this was the part that I was never as big a fan of, because it very much felt like a design choice, not a functional choice. Because it looked great, probably looked a little too good.
No, and this is kind of what my point initially was. Did they take too many big swings at once?
Yeah.
That motor's a big enough swing on its own, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we just start there?
Yeah.
Okay, and maybe all right, we'll do the chassis airbox thing. Okay, but that's not super crazy. But then they did the rear end and then they did the front end at the same time.
So So the rear end, just really quickly, you'll see there's two shock springs that have no shock with them, no damping component to it. It's just two springs that mount between the swing arm and the frame. The shock, the damping component, was basically a traditional shock, but it was sort of mounted inside the swing arm, mounted to the top of the shock, mounted to a plate at the top of the swing arm, and then it sat inside the swing arm, and then was attached to the linkage on the bottom.
Was it still like your traditional damper that we kind of think of?
Yeah, it looked very much...
It wasn't like the rotary damper that Suzuki was playing with in that same time frame.
No, it looked very much like... It was like an Olin shock that just didn't have a spring on it,
okay,
effectively. But it was mounted, kind of buried inside the swing arm, so you really couldn't see it, which, ironically, is a lot like how Honda does, they call it... ProLink or Unit ProLink, something like that.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which is how their CBRs, I think they're still done that way.
I think they're still done that way, and it works really well.
Which is a brilliant design. Let's come back to the Honda in a second. I don't want to sidetrack this.
Really, innovation's everywhere.
Yeah. But anyway, the other really unique thing that they did was the front end on this Motoczysz.
It was the front end that I remember being really excited about, but also my biggest criticism for, because I thought at the time, just do a cartridge fork for now, right? But their front end, especially in hindsight, their front end, I think, is maybe where they should have spent more of their energy as opposed to the engine, because they eventually went electric and the engine was abandoned. But they stuck with that front end for a long time. I think that front end had tremendous potential. I think of all the front end designs that we've talked about today, all the ones that I'm familiar with, my understanding of the Motoczysz front end is maybe we should have explored that.
I hope that somebody picks it up because I think it's a cool idea. Let me explain it briefly. So on a telescopic front end, your stanchions mount to the lower fork leg and they slide into the outer fork leg from the top, right? So that's why the silver shiny bits at the bottom, right?
Yeah, that's the part that moves, that goes through the seals, it passes through all the bushings, and you need to keep it clean.
Yeah. The interesting thing with their front end was it almost looked the opposite. So the lower fork leg was effectively the outer, came up, and it looked much more like a mountain bike fork.
Right, yeah.
Right, where the fork leg, and then there was a crown just above the wheel to give it more rigidity and little bracing. How theirs worked, though, is it was that sort of mountain bike style shape to it, but the lower fork legs were blades.
Right, they were aerodynamic. They were wing-shaped.
Yeah,
as they could be, which was it was more than just that, if I remember.
Yeah, so they were almost blade-shaped. If you looked them up from the inside, they were like cutaways, right? The whole idea was it had plenty of strength, in line with the fork's movement, but it also had plenty of longitudinal strength in the direction of travel. Where it was really flexy was laterally. So these blade shapes were allowed to bow and flex very easily left to right.
Similar to your airplane wing does when you're sitting at the airplane on your window seat and you watch the wing do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just a very gentle bow, but what it does is when you're leaned over on the side, it allows the front end to effectively have kind of a suspension to it, which allows it to track little imperfections and dips in the road better.
It's going to give you better grip. It's going to give you more contact with the ground. It's not going to skitter or chatter.
Yeah, so in theory, it should be more feel. Now, the way they went about this is rather than having fluid inside the fork legs were hollow and they had linear bearings on them.
That's what I remember. Like they were little roller bearings,
effectively long. They look like needle bearings almost.
Yeah, okay.
And it allowed the fork leg to travel on the stanchion buttery smooth. There was no stiction whatsoever because it was literally needle bearings it was riding on. And then the actual control of the spring rate and the damping was what looked like an Olin's rear shock.
It was up near the headset, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it basically mounted to the top of that crown of the lower fork leg and then to the frame.
Kind of similar to the telelever, right? Telelever does the same thing.
Similar idea.
Only instead of an A arm, they actually were using more traditional. It would have the path of travel, the suspension travel would move similar to a cartridge fork. Trail would still decrease under braking. It would still dive. You would still get that feel, but you're still isolating your suspension movements from the fork travel by having a dedicated shock with its own spring, which I would imagine, Brian, would also give you more tuning flexibility, right? You could just change that shock. You could change the spring rate. You could adjust the damping in this one little place without having to take the caps off and pull the springs out and the oil and what's my oil level and all that other nonsense that we deal with all the time with a traditional cartridge fork.
Yeah. And so from a racing tuning perspective, effectively all it was another rear shock just in the front with extremely easy access. You could get right to it when you pulled the bodywork
They
off.
were about the size of a coil mountain bike shock now, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since we looked at it.
Yeah, I don't
It
recall.
was pretty small, wasn't it?
It was shorter than like an Olin shock for your motorcycle, right? It was a little bit shorter. Still had a spring, but it was obviously a lighter weight spring. It had a remote reservoir and clickers to adjust it. Which was great because the shocks are pressurized, right? There's nitrogen pressurizing those shocks. Because of the pressurized nature of them, they basically don't have any cavitation. Now, when they get really hot, the fluid does change behavior still, but the cavitation problem is basically gone because of the pressurization. So you just get a much better, much more consistent feel. No stiction, plenty of grip when you're leaned over, and really not much of a weight penalty. I don't recall they may have been lighter even than a cartridge setup.
Well, if you think about it, your forks are heavy, right?
Yeah, they're not light. Yeah, they're full.
And when we first, this is an interesting little sidetrack. When we went from traditional forks, like in the 80s and 90s, the big thick part was on the bottom and the chrome slidey bits were at the top. And when the world suddenly went to upside down forks, we did it for a strength issue. But there was the crash damage really shifted by having the big thick tube on top, a lot of the crash damage, they were so strong, they were breaking frames, they were ripping triple clamps apart because you would run into something, the forks had no flex or give. It was damaging much more expensive components back when they were traditional forks where it would just bend the chrome bit and you would just buy new chrome bits and keep
bend
going.
The tube and
Yep. So the strength issue, and then that's when a lot of handling issues came up because they were so stout.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of feel in the front end.
Yeah, the other thing that was really interesting, and you've talked about trail quite a bit, because of the way the fork was designed, that the lowers were effectively just a cast piece. There was no fluid or anything to them. They had a lot of flexibility with the shape of them.
Oh, so they could really control where the axle. You could make. I think we talked about this.
Yeah, so the axle went into an insert. The insert was kind of this C-shaped piece at the bottom of the fork leg, and it had different offsets. So you could basically move the axle forward or back, changing your trail numbers.
You could effectively change the geometry of the entire motorcycle in a very precise, controlled way without having to buy new triple clamps, without raising the ride height.
Without all the other compromises. Just by moving the axle, you're effectively directly changing the trail.
You're isolating the one thing that we're always trying to manage. Trail is the most important number, and I have several videos where I talk about everyone gets consumed with rake. Rake is a part of it, but it's pretty small compared to what trail is. And trail is like caster, effectively, if we're going to simplify it as much as we can. And small changes in trail make big changes in handling. And you can basically look at the spec sheet on any motorcycle. You can look at what the trail number is, and you can figure out effectively how that motorcycle is going to handle just by the trail number. You get a really good picture of handling just from that number.
And So in club racing, right, we don't have teams of mechanics and a truck full of parts to swap out and try different things. When a rider is wanting to change something with the way the front end feels, typically they're trying to, whether they know it or not, what they're probably trying to adjust is the trail of the front end, most likely for stability or nimbleness. What we typically do is a lot of things that are compromising other aspects in order to adjust the trail, sometimes not very effectively. So, when really what you might want is you go, boy, I wish I could change the triple clamp offset, but you don't have another set of triple clamps to swap out, right? You don't have that ability. So what you do is you either raise or lower the front end, which makes the front taller or lower, and changes your rake, and then a little bit changes your trail.
Right.
So a lot of these things you're compromising just to adjust this
to make
one
a
thing.
very small change to your trail. That was the 848 that I had. The trail number that it came with from the factory was all wrong, and anybody who rode at the track had to buy very expensive triple clamps with less offset. Less offset increased trail, ironically, it's a very triangles, parallelograms, like all these, but it changed the character of that motorcycle profoundly just by adding, I think it was only like 5 millimeters of trail, which sounds like not much, is a world of difference in trail. And it made that bike so stable everywhere.
Yeah. So I love that bike. I love that project. If this sounds interesting to you, go look it up and go do some digging. There's not a ton of information
There's
out there on
not.
it.
I know. I think Shane was in the documentary about it. I don't know if you can still find that documentary on YouTube. Can you?
I'm sure if you dig a little, you can find it maybe.
Yeah, it was
unlisted,
really.
but
Yeah, because I think a part of it was shot here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember when they were shooting it here. A fascinating project. And again, like Britton, he died of skin cancer, didn't he? He died really young.
Cancer for sure. I can't recall what kind.
What it was, but unfortunate
Yeah.
because, it was. And I thought they looked good. I thought they had a good look to them. They had that R8 kind of stripe, that Audi R8
so
stripe on the side
the
of
project did live on. So the gas engine, the internal combustion engine, died off, and they switched to electric at one point. And then it had pretty significant success at Isle of Man.
Oh, that's right. I forgot all about that. Yeah.
Looked very different. Looked very Tron-ish to me, the way the batteries were designed. You could tell he was still an architect. Like, from an artistic perspective, it was a very good-looking bike. Everything about it was always good-looking.
My Italian heritage really appreciated how attractive the thing was. Even the forks looked good.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just glanced at it and you're like, wait, what? And then you would probably just walk on and not look at it. But if you looked at it, like it was definitely a designer's mind's eye was always considering, okay, we can get the functionality, but if we add a little swoop and we add a curve and we connect it, and then it made it visually very interesting as well as.
There was always something about them that reminded me of, do you remember when MV Agusta came out with, I think they called it an F4?
Oh yeah, that bike was stunning.
It was their 1000cc 4-cylinder with the 4 exhaust off the
pipes
tail.
At the one side. Oh yeah.
Silver and red. Really, really, really pretty. Something about it always reminds me of that. Maybe it's kind of the era as well, because that's kind of the same era.
Definitely the same window of time, wasn't it? Yeah.
Anyway, I've always loved that thing and appreciate it. It's a bummer that it, like a lot of these projects, this crazy thing happens and then just sort of like fades and goes away and we go right back to normal.
Yeah, and it makes me sad. Again, we lose sight of like some of the innovation, and it's expensive, right? And that's, I've worked in sales. I've been in this industry for a long, long time, and people still seem to have this misunderstanding that there's money in motorcycling. There's really not. It's kind of amazing that the industry still survives. There's almost no money in it. And so that's why like there's not a lot of research into helmets. We can talk about helmets for a minute because my friend Carolyn, Doodle on a motorcycle, she just did a really great video where she kind of explores some of the helmets are like, they haven't really changed a whole lot.
Nope.
Right? And not in my lifetime anyway.
Prices have.
Prices. I mean, they're charging a lot more money for them, but it's still styrofoam and a shell.
I can remember in I think like a 5-year span, your absolute top end helmet was $600, and then it was like $1,600.
Yeah, like that was a big jump. But what was it? It was the AGV, the AGV Pisa Corsa or whatever.
Whenever they went to the carbon.
Holy crap! Yeah, like I bought the first version of that helmet. Like it was just called the Corsa, I think, or the Veloce or Corsa or something like that.
Yeah,
and it was like only $450. I'm like, that's a lot of helmet for $450, right? Because at the time the Arai was $600.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh, and then like I went to go buy the next one. And I'm like, wait, what? It's how much now?
Yeah, it was not, and now they're all like, if you really want a top, especially if you want an FIM certified helmet, you are really hard pressed to spend less than $1,000. There's, I think HJC, KYT, there's a handful that are 8-ish, 900, somewhere in there, but helmets are expensive now.
Well, and like go watch Doodle's video. It's really good. She cuts apart a bunch of helmets, and like if you've been around motorcycles for a while, like, and she's like, it's just styrofoam. It's just packing material. And you're like, yeah, and it really shouldn't be. Like we talked, I think, on the last episode that, we have, or an episode or two ago, Climb is running Koroyd, which is like the little hexagon straws. 60 has like they have the styrofoam that has like the fingers that interlock together. So you get different densities of styrofoam. I believe Arai plays with different densities of styrofoam. It's not just packing material. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But at the end of the day, it still kind of is just styrofoam. It's the thing you drink your coffee out of, at a gas station.
These are very precisely manufactured igloo coolers.
Right. And it's like $1,000 for an igloo cooler. And I would love to see so much more innovation in helmet technology. And, again, we talked about this, but the football, when the TBI issue came up, we got a lot of attention to helmets and a lot more research. And again, it's like we've already talked about this. We're not going to go down this hole too deep, but But again, let's keep innovating helmet technology. My mountain bike helmet, I actually texted Carolyn about this. I'm like, my mountain bike helmet, which costs $180, I have 3 different choices in anti-rotational technology, from MIPS to the other one and the other one, right? It has Reco in it, and Reco is a system that your EMTs use, that they put a little thing in it and it gets all of your medical health information out of your helmet. So you don't have to like put stickies or cards like you're unconscious, what's your
Right.
drug allergies. They just scan your helmet, they get all the information. It has a little beacon built into the top of it for search and rescue, so they can spot you from the air. Let's say you ran wide in a corner and yeeted yourself off into the trees, you're unconscious. The helicopter will be able to spot the little beacon in your mountain bike helmet. Motorcycle, your $1,000 motorcycle helmet doesn't have the technology of my sub $200 mountain bike helmet. Like what? Why? Like, come on.
I'd love to hear more. I'd love to hear from the manufacturers on this, because I have a suspicion that it's this. I mean, we talked about this before, so let's not dive down the rabbit hole here. But I have a suspicion it's just due to the way the standards are written.
I agree. Snell is a 10,000-pound gorilla in America. They really control the helmet standards across the board. Is that limiting the innovation, right? So I'd love to talk to somebody. Last week, I reached out to Alpine Stars. We're working on building a relationship with Alpine Stars. It's going very well, by the way. And I talked to them about possibly getting together and working with them, or having them on the podcast, or maybe we go visit them. They have some new airbag technology that's coming out. They are developing their own helmets. It'd be really cool to talk to Alpine Stars about some of the things they're doing to be innovative, because Alpine Stars is always, they're one of those top tier companies we talked about that are always kind of pushing for more technology and improving things and improving safety and enhancement. And the conversation I had with them already, like, we became fast friends pretty quickly because a lot of our goals were aligned, right? Because I believe, the mission of CanyonChasers is really effectively more informed riding populace. The more you know, the more enjoyable the sport is. If you find the right motorcycle, if you find the motorcycle that is the experience you're looking for, you're going to enjoy the sport way more.
Yep.
And safety gear, we need it to be safe, but it doesn't have to look like purple and green zigzags unless that's your thing. It can look cool and it can be comfortable. Good safety gear enhances the comfort and the whole overall experience.
Right.
And when I mentioned that to Alpine Stars, they're like, that's exactly how we feel about all of these things. So I'm going to keep fostering that relationship. Hopefully it turns into something and we can bring some cool stuff to you, because from what she shared with me, they're launching some new airbag technology. We talked about airbags last week that could be might be game changing. And it'd be really cool to learn more about that from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Well, and they license their airbags to tons of other companies, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of smaller companies can figure out how to make a jacket, or can figure out how to make a suit or gloves or what have you. It's a manufacturing process, but the tech that is required for the sensors and everything that goes into an airbag system, a lot of times it's like that is a bridge too far for most of these companies.
Yeah, we just talked there's no money in motorcycles. This is a passion thing, right? Like, motorcycles are only as good as they are because of trickle down technologies from other things, like fighter jets to cars, or some of the things that are making our sport better.
But yeah, I'd love to have Alpine Stars on here, or Dionysi, or whoever.
Yeah, any of them, right? It's just I just happened to get a connection with Alpine Stars that seems to be going really well. And we talked about this too, and I made the joke early on that I will only buy a motorcycle from a company that races MotoGP. You made the same joke that you will only buy gear from a company that races MotoGP. And this is why I think racing is so important. The companies that are supporting racing at the highest level, they're going to be more innovative. They're looking for ways to keep these riders safe. If for no other reason than it's a financial investment, right? How much money is in Pedro Acosta? We don't want him getting hurt. Right. So we want him in a helmet that's going to keep him safe. We want him in a suit that's going to, like, the airbag. Is that going to make it so he can race the next race, as opposed to an injury that could have been preventable? And that forward thinking, that drive for improvement I love that, right?
Yep.
Like, I think we should all be chasing that.
Yeah. Yeah. With the MotoGP too, there's There's the FIM standard for the helmet now, which is great. They all require airbag systems for all the riders. I don't know what the threshold is for what quantifies as an airbag system for MotoGP. I'm sure it's evaluated in some way. But there's lots of other things that come out of that do eventually come down to us, like the way the armor is designed, the way the closure systems for the zippers are designed, all kinds of stuff like that. It may not be like that. There may be a absolute top end piece of gear that you could spend the money and get that is really close or similar to GP, but all of that stuff eventually works its way down to the lower end stuff. And now when you're buying mid-level gear from some of these brands, it is as good or better than this stuff from 10 years ago.
Easily,
or
right?
Less, right?
Yeah, I've said that for years. Like you're always paying attention to think about like some of the basic stuff. Tinted visors is a racing technology. Mm-hmm. I don't wear any helmet without a tinted visor. That came from MotoGP, right? And there's all these other things that the cheek pads that pop out.
Yep.
MotoGP,
yep.
right? Like, and now that's on almost every helmet. You can buy a $300 helmet with a tinted visor and pop out chin straps.
Yeah.
Right? Where in the early days, you had to spend $1,000 to get that technology.
So one of the things, we're talking about MotoGP right now, and it reminds me, they just canceled, the Moto E series, right?
Yeah.
That was going on. They basically announced a few months ago. I don't think we even talked about it on
here. Didn't talk about it, yeah.
But that's it's probably indicative of the problem that Moto E's had the whole time. Yeah. No one's talking about it.
Well, they didn't race every round. They're only at a handful of venues.
And it was not to knock the riders that are in it because they're all extremely talented, but it wasn't big names. And MotoGP definitely was not giving it airtime.
Right.
But the reason I'm bringing up Moto E is electric bikes in general, it's kind of the next frontier in a lot of ways. And I know a lot of riders don't want to hear that, and that's fine. I promise the internal combustion engines aren't going away anytime soon.
Right.
Right. You still get to go get your whatever it is you want. I promise you they're not going away. No one's taking them away. But it is the next sort of field of innovation, right? You're seeing it in cars a lot, whether that's, where we are on the curve of adoption for that, who knows? It's out, to debate, but it definitely seems like electric ones are kind of the next thing that's coming in terms of like major technical innovations. I see them, I think our generation wants the sound. I want the noise. I want the feel. I want all of those pieces because that's what I grew up on. That's what I'm used to.
It's what I dreamed of as a kid.
It's when I think racing, it's engines. I hear it, right? It's not silent.
How many guys do you know they love the smell of race gas and they get like super excited about the smell of race gas?
I think a weird amount of guys like
it is weird, right? They're like, I'd
Yeah.
wear a cologne that was VP racing, like I can't think of a worse smell. Like I hate when I get behind a race bike and you can smell the race gas.
I think the only thing I ever think about when I smell race gas is brain cells.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think about too. Like, ooh, how much dumber am I getting
This is
now?
not making me smarter. I'm sure of that. Yeah.
It's so funny.
But anyway, the electric bikes, I think our generation is going to be fine without them, frankly. Like, we'll live out our years without them.
They're not for us.
But they're not for us. I think that's the point. This isn't for us.
Right.
There's a new generation that this is more the norm. And we've talked about this lately. But I see kids on electric scooters all the time. I see kids on Surons in my neighborhood all the time. And they're having an absolute blast on those things. And they go on trails and they go on streets. They go all over the place. And I think a lot of people like knock it a little, but it's just because it's not what you're used to. But they're having a ball doing it. I think it's great.
It's funny you bring that up because that is literally the topic of the video that's going to be dropped this week on our main channel. And you need to go check it out. I don't know what's going to come out first this week, the podcast or the other video. But the other video, I go deep into the data on what's happening to the motorcycle industry in America, Europe, and Canada. I always call it Canada, and I'm sorry. It's a term of affection. Because I love Canada, but I always say anyway. But it's dying. America used to lead the motorcycle industry. Now we're a footnote in the motorcycle industry. And I have this whole video that explores this pretty deeply. Mrs. CanyonChaser said it's one of her favorite videos that I've ever made. So I don't want to oversell it, but go watch it. I think it's really good. And we go into this that. Again, this is the innovation episode, but on the other side of innovation is tradition and gatekeeping. And, you think back about when you were learning to ride, there was somebody who helped you along the way. Maybe it was your dad, maybe it was your uncle, maybe it was the neighbor kid down the street who helped you get into it. And you look at the kids today, and the world's changed. We live in a different place than when we were kids. And I get somewhat frustrated when people are like, well, kids today should have the same experience I had as a kid. And I think it's a Middle Eastern proverb, and I don't want to get it wrong, but it's something along the lines, don't raise your kids for the world you live in, raise your kids for the world they're going to live in, right? And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that sentiment, and I'm sure that I got the quote wrong, that we get so caught up in, I want you to have the same experience I had, but they never will. The population when I was a kid is a fraction of what it is now. Like, I remember when I was learning how to ride in the mid to late 80s, I would go for a ride after school at like 18, 19 years old on my first little street bike. And I would do this big, it was like a 35-mile loop. And I would see 6, 8 cars. Right? That same loop now, you'd be in traffic for half the time, stop and go. It's a different world. And I think if we want this sport to continue, if we don't want it to die with us, we have to stop gatekeeping. We have to stop saying, you need to have the experience I had. Right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. So I watch the kids in my neighborhood. So I very much live in suburbia, right? I see there's kids all over the place with all kinds of different things.
And you have a kid. You have a kid that's into motorcycles.
She's probably going to be a little tear on one too, I'm sure. So, she has her own little Stasic now. So she loves
those things are
sick.
sick.
Yeah. But there's I can 100% default to the cranky old man who doesn't like all the kids ripping up and down the street without the right gear on, and they're being a nuisance, and they shouldn't be on the roads.
They're in the oncoming lane. They're jumping off curbs into traffic.
Or I can take a second and take a breath and realize I would have been just as bad, if not worse, than they are.
Right.
I would have been cutting through people's yards. I would have been all over the place on that thing, because you almost feel like you can get away with it because it's silent. It feels a little more like a toy-ish, right? Which you've got that great video on the Dax, right? Which I think in your youth, at that time when those bikes came out, that was a toy.
Yeah.
That wasn't
it wasn't a scary motorcycle.
Like
it wasn't a water buffalo.
Like, you were goofing around. You did buy it to have a laugh. Like, nobody bought a Dax to be serious. Right. And that's how I think I look at these things when I see the kids on them. It's like, there's the part of me that's like, oh, they should, be wearing all the right gear, and they're being careless, and they're being dangerous. They're going to whatever. And then it's like, and then they're kids, and I was a kid too. And I would have done the exact same thing on one. Right.
The irony of this whole sentiment is 5 years ago, the grumpy old men, the old farts, we're the old farts now, were like, kids today, all they're doing is sitting in the basement playing Grand Theft Auto.
Right.
And we bitched about that. Kids today are not out and about. Well, now they're out and about. What are we doing? We're bitching about the kids on their electric bikes, like on the sidewalks and through the parks. I'm like, can we stop? Can we
Man, it's easy to be grumpy though.
Oh
man,
my gosh. I'm just going to go shout at the clouds, right? Like, God, darn you clouds.
But I love it. They are having an absolute blast. They are building memories. Like, this is a cool time for them. And I want them to have that experience, because I had a similar experience, right? I can remember being in high school, and it was a slightly different era, but I grew up in a really small town, and I can remember the 4 other people in town my age that had motorcycles. And it was a little like, I and those other guys had nothing in common other than being born in a similar time in the same place. But we were instant friends because we shared this common interest.
Yeah, it was me and David and Brett and Shane.
Yeah,
and I really had nothing in common with them, but we rode motorcycles.
And I still can remember those times, and that was ages ago now. But it's a cool, special thing that you get to have. And do I remember the kids I played video games with? Not really, right? Like, there's something unique about doing these things outside that I love, that they have an option to do this. And if it's on these electric bikes that are more affordable and cheaper and kind of a toy, perfect. Because that's probably way safer on those than on an R6 or on.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean?
Right. And yeah, to a large extent, or whatever other, what freaks me out in my neighborhood far more than the e-bikes is I don't know if your neighborhood's dealing with this. We live on opposite ends of the valley, but there is a plethora. People are buying old golf carts.
I see the golf carts everywhere.
Oh, you do. And so you'll have like 6 or 8 or 10 kids hanging off this golf cart, blowing through stop signs, half tipping over everywhere. 10-1, I would rather see those same kids on little e-bicycles or whatever than that damn golf cart. And those golf carts all over the place, and they're not looking anywhere. The number of close calls I'd had with those stupid golf carts far exceeds the little e-bike issues.
Right. Yeah, I see the kids on the electric scooters, like the stand-up whatever style
yeah,
scooters.
like the Lime scooters. The
that
blight
style.
on modern society, those damn Lime scooters. I hate those things.
I see them on those, and I see them on the Surons and those type of electric things. I think it's great. I love it. I love having them out there doing it. It's the one thing that I think that the cranky old man in me appreciates, though, is the noise.
Yeah,
or the lack of noise.
I want to touch on this for a second because we are as motorhead as we get, right?
Yeah.
Like you and I love motorcycles. We love engines.
So much
like,
so we do a podcast about it.
We do, yeah. Videos, like it's a big part of our life. It's been a big part of our lives for as long as we've known each other, which is we're coming up on over 20 years now, I think, since we've been working together.
Yep.
And we're in the garage on a track day, right? Like, I'm sorry, but track day morning, and the dudes start warming up their engine, and I don't know why they do it. And there's like wham, 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 wham with the open pipe, and there's 6 of these dudes going wham, 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 and you and I are like, I hate the noise. I hate the noise. I can't wait for electric motorcycles because I'm sick of this freaking noise. Like that's, Meanwhile, you and I start the bike, we let it idle for a second, we pull out of the garage, and they just ride slow to get on the pit. It's good to go. We're not doing this like rev thing for 15 minutes.
The one that gets me the most, so when we go to the racetrack, depending on the configuration, sometimes we're in what's called the GP garage, which is right outside of Hot Pit.
Yeah.
And on the track days we do before a race weekend, they will oftentimes set up cones for the racers to go do practice starts, which is fine.
And we're right by
the problem
start
is
cones.
It's like 40 feet away, maybe.
Yeah.
And there's basically a drag strip, right?
Yeah. And these dudes, they rev the bike to the nines, and then they smoke their clutch. So your ears are ringing, and all you can smell is a burnt clutch. So like all day is roasted clutch and ringing ears.
Yeah. And the best part of it, the only redeeming quality of the whole endeavor of the race start, having it happen right there. And I'm not knocking race starts. On a race weekend, I will do a practice start too.
We're one of them. It's like we're
when our garage
ourselves.
doors open and we have to listen to everybody's start, is then the revs come up and then they drop the clutch and they go, and then you watch generally the worst starts you've ever seen.
That's true.
It's
true.
It's like you couldn't have left the line much slower than that.
Yeah, the funny thing is if they just would have started like from a green light, just they'd be faster.
Yeah.
Right? But like the
So I guess they need the practice. So I guess I should be more accommodating
but
to
the
it.
noise, it's the noise that gets me. Like it's so loud. And we say that as, I think, do you have a stock exhaust on anything you own?
Now we sound like old men.
Now we sound like
old men.
Oh man. Yeah. But again, at the same time, there's also, when it's my motorcycle, it sounds great. But your motorcycle, I don't want to hear. Like, and that's really what it comes down to.
It's kind of like, I love my kid, but I don't really want to see your kid.
love my dog, but I don't really like your dog that much. I love my dog. I don't love dogs.
Yeah. That's basically the same thing.
Yeah. It's the human condition.
Anything else?
No, I think that was a really great episode. Again, we looked at the data. Australia, man, you guys, we love you. You guys tune in, and we love you for it. But let us know, like, we only have one MotoGP round left.
Two.
Oh, we do have 2.
2 left. Yep.
Oh, I thought we only had 1. Oh, you just made my weekend that we have 2 left.
And we have Valencia's last one, then we do the test afterward.
Oh, I always watch the
so
test.
There's
3.
more
The
to
test
talk about.
sometimes is more fun than the last race round because you get to see all the prototypes.
At this point, I'm more interested in the test that's upcoming. Like the races will be good. I'm going to watch the races, of course. But like championships are kind of done and dusted. The only thing that's not really is Moto 2.
Right.
And so that'll be exciting for the next 2 rounds to see who.
Yeah, Moto 2's been a nail biter.
Yeah.
So like Moto 2 is typically really good.
Yeah.
If you want to watch good racing, Moto 2's there. Like
It'll be
it's
good.
delivers.
But yeah, at this point, like from MotoGP's perspective, I'm really curious about the testing to hear what comes of it with Yamaha's V4. Like there's a lot to come still. I think that's exciting.
Top Rack will probably, that's the one for us to see Top Rack on the MotoGP bike. There's going to be a lot. And if you have a MotoGP subscription, no affiliation, we get no kickback. I think sometimes don't they let you watch the you can subscribe for like the last couple rounds and you get the first test session for free. I don't know. Like
You should go look online. If you're interested in it, go look online.
They usually do these deals every year. I haven't looked this year. I've been subscribing to MotoGP forever. I don't know. But but I love watching, and sometimes it'll be 20 minutes with no announcers and you're just listening to engines. And you're just watching these bikes fly by, and they have no logos on them.
Winter testing.
The winter, it's just carbon fiber. Yeah. It's just you get to see what the bikes actually look like without all the logos. The leathers are all de-logoed.
Yep.
It's really fun to watch, especially if you're into this sort of thing.
So we have a few more weeks, and then we're gonna have to do like a winter test podcast.
Oh, it'd be fun to do a winter test recap, like what we saw, what we observed. Share some of our ideas with you guys.
I'm giving you several weeks of heads up. I need you to go do some research and decide what was your favorite winter testing livery.
Okay. I'll do that. Yeah.
You got time. But anyway. All right. I think that's all we got for this week.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know if you have questions. That's really what that whole discussion devolved into.
That's where we were going.
Yeah, that's where we're going. If you have questions about anything, let us know. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. I think we're over the threshold. We should be monetized now, which is for a small shoestring budget like we are, that makes a world of difference. Yeah. So thank you.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe. Yeah. Share with your buddies. Get them tuning in. We really appreciate it.
That just means we get to keep doing this.
It means we get to keep doing it. But we wouldn't be here without you. We're here for you. So let us know what you need from us, and we're here for you. All right, man.
Thanks. See you guys.
We'll see you next week. Hopefully.
Bye.
Hopefully. Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Bye.